What would you do if every second meant life or death? If the enemy was at your back and one wrong move could end it all? World War II wasn't just about battles and strategies. It was also about survival. And in the chaos, some men and women pulled off escapes so daring, so unbelievable, they sound like fiction. But these stories are real. This is the untold history of the greatest escapes from death in World War II. The world at war. The year was 1939. Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler had unleashed a storm across Europe. Blitzkrieg crushed Poland, France, and much of the continent. Prisoner of war camps filled with captured soldiers. Civilians lived under fear. Resistance fighters risked everything. For millions, survival seemed impossible. But in the shadows, a few refused to surrender. They fought not with guns, but with courage, cleverness, and sheer will to live. Hero versus villain. These are their stories, tales of ordinary people who outsmarted one of the deadliest regimes in history, and every time they were supposed to die, they found a way out. The Great Escape, Stalag Luft III, 1944. In the heart of Germany, thousands of Allied pilots were locked inside a heavily guarded POW camp, Stalag Luft III. The Nazis thought escape was impossible, but the prisoners thought otherwise. By hand, using spoons and tin cans, they dug tunnels, nicknamed Tom, Dick, and Harry. Working in shifts, under the noses of German guards, they created a hidden underground highway. On the night of March 24, 1944, 76 men crawled out of the earth into the freezing night. But there was a problem. The tunnel came up short of the nearby woods. The men had to run across open ground. Only 3 made it to freedom. The rest were captured, and 50 were executed on Hitler's direct orders. It was one of the most daring and tragic escapes of the war. The Wooden Horse, Stalag Luft III, 1943. A year earlier, in the same camp, another escape had taken place. This time, it involved a simple gymnastics horse. Every day, the prisoners carried the wooden horse into the yard. They pretended to exercise, while hidden inside, 2 men secretly dug a tunnel. When the digging ended, they climbed inside, crawled under the wire, and disappeared. 3 men, Eric Williams, Michael Kottner, and Oliver Pillpot, escaped successfully. They made their way through Germany, Sweden, and eventually back to Britain. It was so incredible, it later inspired a best-selling book and film. The Colditz Castle Breakouts. High on a hill in Saxony stood Colditz Castle. It was the Nazis' most secure prison. Here, they sent the incorrigible Allied escape artists, officers who had already tried to break free elsewhere. The Germans thought no one could escape Colditz. They were wrong. Using bedsheets, civilian disguises, and even a homemade glider built in the attic, prisoners constantly tried to flee. One British officer, Pat Reed, finally made it out in 1942, slipping past guards and crossing into Switzerland. His story became legendary. The Comet Line, civilian resistance. Not all escapes happened in camps. Some were orchestrated by civilians. In Belgium and France, resistance fighters built secret escape lines for downed Allied airmen. One of the most famous was the Comet Line. Led by a young Belgian woman named André de Jong, civilians risked torture and death to guide pilots through occupied Europe, across the Pyrenees, and into Spain. Imagine a 20-year-old woman walking hand in hand with stranded soldiers, pretending they were family, while Gestapo patrols hunted them. Many times she was nearly caught, but hundreds of men owed their lives to her courage. The Arctic survival of Leonid Bernstein. In the frozen wilderness of the Soviet Union, partisan fighters faced both Nazis and the brutal cold. One man, Leonid Berenstein, a Jewish commander, was ambushed. He was shot, left for dead. But Berenstein crawled into the snow, alone, bleeding, and somehow survived. He lived off berries, roots, and melted snow. Weeks later, he rejoined his unit and continued fighting. His escape wasn't from a camp, but from death itself. Prisoners of Sobibor, 1943. Not all escapes were about soldiers. In occupied Poland stood Sobibor, a Nazi death camp. Tens of thousands had already been murdered there. Escape seemed impossible. But in October 1943, led by Soviet POW Alexander Petrsky, the prisoners revolted. They lured guards into workshops, killed them quietly, and cut phone lines. Then, with hundreds of prisoners, they stormed the gates. Gunfire echoed, mines exploded. Many were killed, but around 300 broke free. Only 50 survived the war. It was one of the only successful uprisings in a Nazi death camp. The death-defying flight of Jan Balstrud. In 1943, Norwegian commando Jan Balstrud's mission was compromised. His team was betrayed. Everyone was killed, except him. Wounded and frostbitten, he fled across the Arctic, barefoot in the snow at times, hunted by German soldiers. Locals risked everything to shelter him. He hid in caves. He amputated his own toes with a knife to stop gangrene. And after weeks of unimaginable suffering, he reached neutral Sweden. His story became one of the most incredible survival tales of the war. Douglas Bader's final breakout attempt. Douglas Bader was a British fighter ace who had lost both legs in an accident before the war. Yet, he returned to fly again. When shot down and captured, the Nazis couldn't believe he fought with prosthetic legs. Even in captivity, Bader never stopped trying to escape. At one point, German officers grew so frustrated they confiscated his artificial legs at night to stop him from climbing out windows. Though he never made it home during the war, his spirit and repeated attempts made him a legend among POWs. The ultimate escape. All these escapes shared one thing in common: courage. Ordinary men and women facing certain death who refused to give up. The climax came not in one single escape, but in the combined defiance of thousands who tried. Every tunnel dug, every disguise worn, every step through enemy territory. It was proof that even under Nazi terror, the human spirit could not be broken. By 1945, Hitler's empire collapsed. Many of the escapees lived to see freedom. Some wrote books, others remained silent. But their escapes left behind stories of resilience that still inspire us today. Moral of the story. What do these escapes teach us? That courage is not the absence of fear, it's action even when fear surrounds you. That sometimes survival itself is the greatest victory.